All right, let me share this inshallah ta'ala. Bismillah.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Just sharing and we'll be getting started. طيب. الحمد لله بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة صلى الله عليه وكل ضلالة في النار. I commence in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most sublime. I send salutations of prayers and peace upon the finality of prophets and messengers, Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, upon his family, his companions, and all who follow him in righteousness until the day of judgment. Indeed, beloved brothers and sisters, the best speech is the Book of Allah, Jalla wa Ala, the Quran. And the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi. And the worst of affairs are newly invented matters in terms of creed and worship, as every newly invented matter is something that leads humanity. I'm using it. Leads humanity astray, and whatever leads humanity astray leads them away from the mercy of Allah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to always grant us his mercy and protect us from his wrath. So alhamdulillah, tonight is our last session in this book, but we know that next week, inshallah ta'ala, we have Sister Susie Ismail, who is the author of this book, joining us for our last session in the course. And she will talk about the research that she did, the importance, inshallah ta'ala, and kind of, where do we go from here, inshallah ta'ala. And then tonight we're looking at the last story in the book, his side of the story, inshallah ta'ala. So his side of the story, inshallah ta'ala. And alhamdulillah, we'll look at what was the analyzation at the end by the person she had analyzed the story. Then we'll give our own, and we'll also include everybody else, inshallah ta'ala, to add. So as always, we'll begin by reading the case study, inshallah ta'ala, and then after that, we'll analyze it. So he says, I once watched a movie with my then fiance called The 7-Year Itch. It was a romantic comedy about a cheating couple realizing how wrong they were for each other after 7 years of marriage. We laughed our way through it, never thinking that the movie could have been a complete parody of our upcoming marriage that would end with an eerily foreshadowed 7-year clawing and scratching. We met at the university in a 4th-year elective class. We were both on the prowl for a spouse anyway as we neared graduation. I was surprised we hadn't met before in the Muslim circles that gravitated around the prime campus centers, but apparently she preferred to keep to herself. The stars seemed to align that semester, and we both fell for each other hard. She was smart and sassy with a good head on her shoulder. I was more of the dreamer and the sensitive romantic type, while she was focused and hardworking. Where I was calm and collected, she was high-strung and slightly on edge. Our friends chalked and quick engagement and impending marriage to a typical case of opposites attracting. So they talked about their quick engagement and that opposites attract. They were right to a certain extent, yet as much as opposites can initially attract, they can also repel each other when that initial fascination with the differences eventually fade away. Our marriage started out in the most ideal way. We had a grand wedding with plenty of close-knit family and friends. Both sets of parents loved each other and got along splendidly, and everyone gave 2 thumbs up with full approval of our union. You couldn't have asked for a more scripted plan for the ideal marriage setup. Somehow, though, in some way, our marriage went terribly wrong very early on and continued to spin out of control from bad to worse the longer we stuck it out. We spent freely on our European honeymoon since we both gotten great job offers upon graduation and were confident that we have plenty of funds to pay off our credit card debts once we settled in at home. We were like 2 kids in a candy shop, getting their first taste of freedom. While our parents had advised us on all sort of marriage matters, they seemed to neglect the very important matter of financial restraint and sound financial planning. We were young and in love, and everything seemed like a new adventure just waiting to be experienced. I should have noticed my wife's excessive spending habits during this first trip. She gobbed up purses and shoes that cost more than a few months of our combined salaries on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and spent without reserve on expensive perfumes and gifts from Rome. In Brussels, she insisted on buying me a costly hat that I knew I would never wear, and in London, she accessorized herself with silk scarves and cocky barrettes that she purchased with utter abandon. We began our honeymoon with what I thought was a good financial plan. I purchased our whirlwind 2-week tour of Europe with all of our food and hotel expenses on my recently issued credit card. To balance things out, we decided that any purchases she wanted to make while we were there would go on her credit card. With this even sharing in mind, I didn't try to stop her from purchasing the ridiculous items that seemed to make her so happy. Our starting salaries appeared to be exorbitant at that time, and as if they would easily cover our steep expenses. When we finally returned to our newly rented apartment, we were thrilled to see that our parents had made sure all the furniture we purchased on store credit was delivered and set up before our arrival. Unfortunately, we realized that their help stopped there. Our pre-purchased curtains still needed to be hung up. The sheets needed to be placed on the beds, and our clothes and wedding gifts still needed to be put away. I felt slightly overwhelmed by what needed to be done, but I knew that we would get it done eventually. In the meantime, my wife and I, still in honeymoon mode, left our to-do list for later and stepped out to grab a bite to eat and to watch a movie. We began both work the next morning, and the undone tasks around the apartment remained that way, undone. Excuse me. Our parents were anxious to visit, and we had to keep coming up with excuses to delay their drop-in. Worried about our evasiveness, they stopped by unannounced a few weeks later and were utterly dismayed to see the sorry state of our apartment. Between work and outings, we had neglected to do the basic chores around the house. While I wasn't stuck in the caveman era, I was growing tired of constantly eating out and was hoping my new bride would eventually kick into wife gear and cook us a hot meal. Unfortunately, cold cereal had been my dinner lately, and the pile of dirty cereal bowls with sour milk continued to grow in the sink. I didn't want to upset my wife by suggesting that she take care of them, but I also didn't want to give her the idea that I would pick up the slack for her. So the dishes just sat there in the sink, along with the accumulating laundry, the still unopened gifts, and the unhung curtains. You can imagine our parents' dismay upon entering the apartment and finding things in such a state of disarray. My wife had also begun claiming one night a week as her girls' night out. And as luck would have it, that happened to be the night the family stopped by. I knew my wife worked hard in her position as a civil engineer, and I worked even harder as a technology consultant. So our busy lives just didn't seem to leave much room for the practicalities of keeping a house. Within a few minutes of entering the apartment, the moms worked together to right the mess, to fix the mess. Calmly and efficiently, they washed the dishes, they hung the curtains, they swept and vacuumed, and even sorted out the laundry. As I sat back in embarrassment with my father and my father-in-law. Just as they were finishing up, I heard the key turn in the front door and my wife walked in. Rather than being pleasantly surprised by the visitors and the unexpected cleanliness of our home, her face fell. And I could see that her reaction was not going to be a good one. Her mother and mother-in-law pounced upon her and really let loose about her neglect of wifely duties. I felt bad for her, but I wasn't quite sure what to do. They had already relegated me to the position of the helpless victim, and I preferred to stand safely in this meek zone than actually enter the battle and risk getting shot at. As soon as our families left, my wife turned to me with an expression full of venom. "How dare you? How dare you?" she spurred with seething anger. "I work long hours every day to help you pay the bills, and when I come home expecting to kick back and relax a little, this is what I get? You complained about me and brought them over here to clean up after your mess?" I remember the angry tirade continued long into the night as insults of "you coward," "you two-faced lazy scum," and all sorts of other terms I've never anticipated would slip out of her lovely mouth were pelted at me. I took it all in stride and sat silently while waiting for her diatribe to wind down and end. Somewhere in between the hurled words of abuse, I offered her a bowl of cereal, which brought about another onslaught of insults. Deciding that I could not win, I called it a night and headed into our bedroom as she continued to shout behind me. I was sure that she would come join me in a bit and everything would work out fine. But she didn't. She slept on the couch that night and didn't rejoin me for a full week. I figured that she just needed some time to get over her hormones or whatever was bothering her, and I left her alone during that time. It was with resignation that she finally came back to the bedroom. I did feel like I won a small victory that night, as she also cooked for the first time, albeit it was rubber chicken and burnt rice, but at least she was trying. I was confident that we had just a little bump in our marriage road and we'd be back on the right track in no time. Little did I know that my wife was one to hold a grudge. We went back to our busy work schedules and soon realized that the huge paychecks we were expecting barely covered the expenses of rent, utilities, and our too many meals eating out. We still hadn't made a dent in the payments of any of our accumulated credit card debt, and we're quickly watching the interest compound on each purchase. Since organization was never really my forte, I left it up to her to set up our online bill paying system and to keep track of all of our expenses. Luckily, checking these things online, she had a wake-up call and realizing we couldn't continue to afford eating out as we were. Frozen TV dinners became the meal of choice every evening. Since she still got offended when I ate cereal, I tried to force the nasty goop she microwaved down my throat and complimented her on her efforts of heating up the microwave food. A year into marriage, we started to hit a more moderate routine. I still yearned for my mom's cooking and tried to sneak back Tupperwares of her leftovers every time I stopped by my parents' house. The fights that erupted as a result and the accusations of me being a mama's boy just didn't seem worth the effort sometimes. Even though our expenses were tight, I was constantly tipping over my wife's new Prada shoes or Coach and Louis Vuitton bags. Although I had her dealing with the organizational aspects of expenses, I wasn't an idiot and had at least some inkling of what these products must cost. Since I disliked confrontation and the fights that invariably resulted, I tried to skirt around the issue. Checking our online account, I was shocked to see the long list of unpaid credit card balances and late payments on the phone bill, utilities, and even the rent. I couldn't believe that I had trusted her and that she couldn't even handle simple finances. I decided to take over the reins of the finances, and she literally had a fit. She insisted that I was insulting her and just wanted to take her hard-earned money away from her. Apparently, she had attained a separate bank account upon marriage and used her paychecks for her personal purchase, as she puts it. That was the first time I ever lost it on her. She didn't cook, she didn't clean, she didn't do anything around the house. The least she could do was contribute to help pay for our living expenses. And then if there was something above and beyond left over, she could spend it as she wished, on whatever she wished. My honesty led to another week on the couch. But this time, I was the one who chose to sleep on the slightly sagging furniture. It was the first time in our marriage that I had put my foot down, and it actually felt good. With my newfound assertion, I decided I was going to stop the nonsense of the past year and make sure to set her straight. I made a schedule of chores and meals that we would complete together. After all, I was a fair man, and I loved my wife. So I knew that with her working outside of the house, maybe it was time I got involved with household chores as well, even though it was contrary to my upbringing. I knew my mother especially would be appalled if she knew that I helped scrub toilets and mop floors, but I figured what my parents didn't know would not hurt them. Our arrangements worked out somewhat well for a few weeks. Then my wife found out that she was expecting. I experienced a mixture of emotions when she told me. I was surprised, I was shocked, I felt fear, and maybe even a glimmer of excitement. We had talked about having children, but had intended to wait until we'd save enough money to be able to afford the expenses of a child. Now, just a few months following our first anniversary, she was telling me that I was going to be a father. She decided to quit her job at that point simply because of her nausea and the fatigue kept her from thinking. Even though I tried to convince her to just go out on disability or to request a longer maternity leave, she stubbornly refused. Unfortunately, she miscarried just a few weeks after she found out about the pregnancy and just a few short days after she had quit her job. Although I hadn't really grown attached or even accustomed to the idea that I was going to be a father, she became obsessed with the whole concept of motherhood. She refused to return to work and focused all of her efforts on conceiving again. After several stress-filled months had passed with my wife sitting at home feeling sorry for herself, she was thrilled to find out that she was finally pregnant again. With her at home, the house was beginning to finally show some sense of order. Her cooking still wasn't really edible, but the fact that she was trying meant the world to me. She was happy again, and it showed in the way she greeted me and everything she did. This pregnancy lasted a few weeks longer than the first one, and then she miscarried again. It took us 3 long years to actually have our first child. 3 years of constant complaining, struggling to make ends meet, and barely tolerating each other. When our son was finally born, she was thrilled. I have to admit, the birth was a little anticlimactic for me since I've waited for the event for so long. Although my wife has shown no interest in returning to work during the past 3 years, just a few short weeks after the birth of our long-awaited baby, she suddenly couldn't wait to go back to work. She quickly found another job in her field and started right away. I was confused. I was confused by her behavior because now that she had a legitimate excuse to stay home, she suddenly wanted to throw her son in the daycare and to return back to work. It was almost as if she had just needed to prove to herself that she was not defective and that she could actually have a baby. And now that she had accomplished that, it was one more thing that she could check off her overachiever checklist and move on with her life. She quickly returned to her old habits of working late hours, coming home to a disheveled house, and spending as much time as she could without the baby. and with her friends or out shopping instead. Dropping off my son at daycare broke my heart. So when both sets of grandparents offered to watch him, I jumped at the chance. Again, my acceptance of their help led to another huge fight that I still can't really figure out. Our marriage was back on shaky grounds, and I was terrified that our son was going to get caught in the middle. As difficult as it was for us to have our first baby, the second one came unexpectedly and easily. Our daughter was born 2 years after the birth of my son into a tumultuous marriage. My wife seemed overwhelmed by our 2 children and kept insisting that she was ready to return to work less than 6 weeks after she delivered. Watching her emotional upheaval, I encouraged her to go back to work, even though I wasn't sure whether or not the grandparents could handle caring for 2 kids at the same time. By this time, our finances were disastrous, and it just kept getting worse. I'd received a pay cut and was barely getting by. We developed a system of drop-offs and pickups for the kids and tried to instill some kind of routine in our day. The stress of marriage, 2 kids, and work was taking a toll on both of us. My wife seemed to be able to find plenty of time to hit the gym, go out with friends, chat on the phone, and even participate in volunteer functions, but very little time to actually spend at home with me and the kids. I'd upgraded my cereal routine to pasta, and that was feeding our son a steady diet of frozen chicken nuggets and plain pasta for dinner almost every single night. SubhanAllah. I can't say my wife was a completely absent mom. She came home for the feedings and the diaper changes occasionally, but she looked miserable and overwhelmed around her children. I couldn't understand why she was so determined to have a child at first, but acted so distant from them now that we were both here. Our home could not have been more different from the loving atmosphere that I had grown up in, where my mom had always been a selfless mountain of love with her children. My wife was consumed with succeeding at work and competing in luxuries with her friends. I never doubted that she loved her kids, but I just don't think she realized the best way she could show that love was by spending time with them. Our weekdays were taken up with drop-offs, pickups, and coming home from work late and exhausted. We barely talked to each other anymore. On the weekdays, as we both sunk down into sleep with hardly enough energy to even change the kids into their pajamas. Our weekends were not much better, as we each ran our separate errands, usually with the kids dropped off at one of the grandparents' homes. At night, we joined each other again for an evening outing visiting friends, which inevitably turned into a crying fest as all the kids competed for their parents' attention. It was a few days shy of our 7th anniversary when we both kind of just knew that our marriage was not going to work out and that neither of us had really ever been happy with the other. The kids were both crying after we had picked them up and brought them home. We were both in our usual state of exhaustion from work, and we had just realized that we had no milk, we had no chicken nuggets in the refrigerator. I had assumed that she had done the grocery shopping over the weekend, and she assumed that I had done the grocery shopping over the weekend. We didn't erupt into any of our usual melodramatic fights or anything. It was more of a sad feeling that this was not the way our marriage should have been. I went out to get the milk and something to feed the kids, and when I came back, the house was completely empty. She left a simple note saying that she'd taken the kids and gone to her mother's house and that she'd be back in the morning to collect the rest of her things. There was no goodbye, nor any sentimental words left to say. We were 7 years too late for any words now. And this is the end of his story. So I'll open up the floor, inshallah ta'ala, for you guys first, and then we'll kind of go into the analysis, inshallah ta'ala. If you can unmic yourself, you can raise your hand like always, and I will unmic you, inshallah ta'ala. Or you can use the chat like always, inshallah. So Brother Omar, he says, put his foot down, subhanAllah. So and it seems like that didn't work for him, right? I think one of the issues, I think, was that whole issue of what their friends called the opposites attracting, right? That they didn't realize that really they were not compatible. And compatibility is something big in Islam, inshallah ta'ala. It's something that the scholars recommend that the both individuals look at to make sure that they are compatible. Make sure that they do have things that they like, that they both like, inshallah ta'ala, that their goals, that their mission in life, that all of that matches, inshallah ta'ala, or closely matches. Because if you're not compatible, then inshallah ta'ala, what's going to happen is just this, that somewhere down the road, all of those differences that you guys have, the different outlooks of life, right? She clearly didn't want to be a wife, a mother. She wanted to be a person who kind of even lived like a single life, right? Kind of like, I come and go as I please. I go out with my friends, I hang out, I go shopping, I spend money, and then when I come home, don't ask me to do anything, right? SubhanAllah, it seems to me, that it could have been a very young mentality. And stuck in the dunya and not realizing what a family is really supposed to be about, inshallah ta'ala. Go ahead, Omar. Bismillah.
Naam, that's I was thinking that, and I think that the reason why I found put his foot down, right, ironic, and was because I feel like, you're watching, like, when the house begins to crumble is when you should say something. But then now the house is falling into pieces, and this is when you want to, start fixing it. And I feel like he should have learned how to put his foot down right at the beginning, when he sees her spending and doing this and doing that and things that he clearly, he disagrees with, but he feels like, well, just because it's her money and just because it's this and that, like, she's putting credit. And, it seems like they were at a huge deficit before they even got back from the honeymoon, like in an incredible way. I think that the way the story details it, it's an understatement, from what he made it sound like. And he kind of just let a lot of things happen, even the house getting set up, like, he clearly had an issue with it, but why didn't he just like say like, yo, ma, like, the house could look like this, the house could look like that, let's fix up the house, we're home now, instead of like, you could do certain things, but he's just like, yo, I disagree with this, I disagree with that. And it's like, who are you telling that to? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not saying that to anybody. And so you're watching it, and for all intents and purposes, if you're cheating the marriage like that, then you're letting her feel like she's a roommate. You know what I'm saying? Right from the beginning. And it's interesting because from the amount of time that he makes it seem like they shared, I don't even see like time where they could have been intimate, because he doesn't sound like he had, like, they shared that kind of like love and time. It's strange. I just feel like if he would have put his foot down in the beginning, it could have went a lot smoother, because it doesn't seem like, again, they're young, but you have to make some decisions as a man to kind of like let the woman know, things are about to change. And alhamdulillah, it doesn't mean things have to get like super rigid, but at the same time, things have to change. You know what I'm saying? And if you disagree with certain things, you can't just let that slide. And the father clearly saw that. And when they came over, and he's like, they made me feel like a victim, so I'm not getting a lot of fire. Like, yo, that's your wife. You know what I'm saying? Like, how you get OD'd on, right? Shake, and then you let her get up, and then you acted like, yo, that's not me. So it's like, it's a problem. Right from the beginning, he sounded like somebody who is scared of confrontation, to the point where like he would let himself get defeated by like a weak attempt. Any type of scratch is over,
No. SubhanAllah. One of the things probably, I would just reword it a little bit, inshallah. I wouldn't use the word put your foot down. It could be a word that causes war of the roses in the household, right? I would say, they just lacked communication, right? They needed more communication skills. He lacked communicating with her. She lacked communicating with him. And definitely, expressing the way you feel when things happen, it's important, right? Naturally, we've discussed this in the love languages class, right? Naturally, we think that we're going to change people, and the reality is you're not going to change anybody. People are who they are, right? People are who they are, inshallah ta'ala. You're not going to change anybody. People may try to change themselves to please their Lord and some other things, but the bottom line, people are who they are. They came up a certain way, they were raised a certain way, they see life a certain way, inshallah ta'ala. And you coming in and loving them and being, mashallah, the love of their life, quote unquote, doesn't mean that now they're going to flip 360 degrees and change who they used to be to now please what it is that you want them to be, right? And this is why it's very important in that very first beginning stage that you begin to kind of have that conversation of the expectations, right? The marriage contract. The contract is something that is very important. As long as you put things in the contract that do not make halal what's haram and don't make haram what's halal, the scholars are of agreement that, those things can be added into the contract, inshallah ta'ala. And of course, Imam Ahmed is the most accommodating of all of them. But you put those things in the contract, inshallah ta'ala, and you discuss them. You say, this is what I want in the contract, inshallah ta'ala, and why? And will you accept it or will you not accept it? And then this is kind of where you get to see where, well, we may be fit for each other, we may not be fit for each other. We've gotten to this point, and now this may be the point that kind of breaks it off, and we don't go forward from here any longer, because I have certain expectations of a wife, or I may have certain expectations of a husband, and you don't meet that, right? Or as maybe the person meets 85% and they don't meet 15%, or they don't meet 20%. And you may have to figure out how you're going to deal with that 15, 20% that they don't meet. Because, for the most part, they're probably not going to change that 15, 20%, just like you're not going to change your 15 and 20% either, right? So I think that's very important, inshallah ta'ala. So I think when, he talked about putting the foot down, I think, he didn't do it, right? One, it was just, false talk, right? It was a thought in his mind that never produced anything. But I think it was just a lack of communication, right? A lack of communication from the very beginning before the marriage, and then a lack of communication once they entered into the marriage, inshallah ta'ala, and that just ruined it, subhanAllah, unfortunately. Sister Munira, she says, she stated that she makes it clear she did not want to cook. She did state that, supposedly in her story, right? She did state that she made it clear that she didn't want to cook. And this is why he's saying, opposites attract. But in his mind, right? That's why I said in his mind, he had the idea that once they got married and moved in, that she will begin to take on wifely duties, right? But she was clear that that's not what she wanted, right? She said in her side of the story, I was clear that I told him I didn't want to cook, right? And then it was clear to him that she didn't want to cook when she didn't cook, when they were eating out every single night. And then they started eating TV dinners, the microwave dinners, Allahu Akbar, right? And he despised the microwave dinners. So at this point, he really only had one choice, right? Because she did communicate that to him. It was either you cook or you continue to buy out. And obviously buying out for them was just out of the question, and it was just breaking their pockets, and I can't imagine how unhealthy that lifestyle may be as well, of buying out every single night. You're not cooking your food, you're not the one salting it, you're not the one making it, how much grease, how much oil. So, you're looking for, just sickness to come upon you when you just eat out every single day anyway. So, it was an issue that he accepted, unfortunately, prior to the contract, that he probably shouldn't have, because she was clear with what she was going to do and what she wanted, subhanAllah. And definitely, he assumed that she would change after the marriage, and she didn't change, subhanAllah. Anyone else? If you can't unmute, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you. Sister Sumaya says, I think this could be a good book for a couple to read together. and discuss before they get married. This can help them see each other's perspective of marriage and gender roles. Yeah, I agree. It would be a good book to kind of read together, inshallah ta'ala, and kind of, look at and say, okay. And honestly, is that me? Let's be honest. That's me in this story, or that's not me. Or I despise that type of person in the story. And as the two people are talking about that book and those stories, perhaps some realities come to the forefront, right? Some realities come to the forefront, and they begin to see some things about that other side of the person, inshallah ta'ala, as they are reading the stories together, inshallah ta'ala. So yeah, definitely a great suggestion, Sister Sumayya, that, couples can actually read the book together. And again, When Muslim Marriage Fails by Susie Ismail, inshallah ta'ala. Anyone else? Excuse me. Type. Until somebody has something else, I look through. We talked about that. Yeah, and then again, they mentioned the whole issue of the parents advising them about everything under the sun except finances, right? You need to make sure that you're watching out what your finances are, especially for our newlywed couples, inshallah ta'ala. Because your gross pay is one thing, your net pay is another, inshallah ta'ala. You need to be able to do all of that math, inshallah ta'ala, right? If I buy a home, how much is the home down payment going to cost me? What is the mortgage going to cost, inshallah ta'ala? How much is the insurance of the house? How much, inshallah ta'ala, is going to be the taxes every year that I have to pay on the house, the state taxes, or how much is going to be the light, the gas, the electric, our cell phone bill, our food consumption monthly, inshallah ta'ala, our clothing expense. If we have kids, begin taking that into consideration on your salary from the beginning, inshallah ta'ala. If we have kids and we're going to put them in Islamic school later on, that's $5,000 to $7,000 or $10,000 a year for each kid that we put in Islamic school. Can we afford that? Their clothing, their food, the baby food, everything else, the number begins to add up. One of the things I remember, subhanAllah, when I was teaching I was teaching in Islamic school, middle and high school, that, of course, my 11th graders, my 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, they knew it all, right? And we were talking about, we used to teach this class. I taught the marriage class to them, because I wanted them to be prepared as well by the time they hit, college. And we began to talk about what it takes to get married. And I remember, subhanAllah, I told one of the students, I said, okay, where do you work? Give me a job. Where do you work? How much money do you make? And I put it up on the board. You make $15 an hour? Okay, good. How many hours a week you working? 40 hours a week? Okay, good. Let's go ahead and tally that up. That's what you're making a week. This is what you're making a month. Gross. Go ahead and, times this percentage. You may get your net around this much, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, where do you want to live? What type of apartment you want to live in, inshallah ta'ala? What type of phone you want to have? What type of cell phone you want to have? You want Apple? You want the latest Microsoft phone? What do you want? What type of service you want to have, inshallah ta'ala? You want unlimited, inshallah ta'ala, everything, so we can look at the plans, inshallah ta'ala, see what you're going to pay monthly. Let's see the electric, the gas, And wallahi, as I go and we're deducting, all of a sudden the students start seeing we go into the negative and they start owing money. And I'm like, what are you going to do now? Now you're completely broke, inshallah ta'ala. Your marriage is probably going to go into shambles because your wife doesn't want to live outside in the street in a box. She's going to return back home to her parents. You have to think about these things, right? So finances is everything, inshallah ta'ala. And if you live on the East Coast like I do, I don't care if you're making $100,000 a year, you're in double digits, triple digits, inshallah ta'ala. Triple digits in the East Coast is not even enough. You can make $100 grand a year in the East Coast. It's not enough money, inshallah ta'ala, right? You need to plan, you need to prepare, inshallah ta'ala, for what you're going to get yourself into. And obviously, she was spending as if she was rich, Prada, Louis Vuitton, and they definitely couldn't afford it. And the mistake that they made as well was that, they honeymooned and they just kept swiping and swiping and swiping and swiping and swiping. And, when you swipe like that, the reality is you don't even know what you're spending, and that stuff adds up so fast. That $10, $20, $50 here, $60 there, $100 here turns into thousands later. And then all of a sudden you're sitting around saying, wow, what am I going to do? Right? Subhanallah Rabbil Azim. Right? So if naturally, especially for a new couple, if you can't afford it, don't do it, inshallah. Stay away from it until you can save some money, until you can afford it, or until you put a plan together that, we're going to go ahead and put X amount of dollars on the credit card, and we're going to pay that off by the end of the year, inshallah ta'ala, right? The issue about the mother and the mother-in-law coming over, subhanallah, to the house, the reality, he took the chunk way out, right? SubhanAllah, he just sat there and was like, okay, they already declared me innocent. I'm going to go ahead and play innocent and see if this works in my favor. It's my wife's fault. She's not being the wife in the house. Honestly, I can see why his wife came home and flipped out on him, right? Because the reality is he should have texted her, right? Sent her a text and said, honey, my love, our parents are here. They walked into our messy home. Your mothers are wilding out. They're cleaning. They're putting stuff up. They're folding laundry. When you get home, be ready, right? Be prepared. You know what I'm saying? Start mentally getting yourself ready when you get home. I'm sitting on the couch quiet because I don't want no part of the beef, right? I don't want no part of the issues, inshallah ta'ala. I'm quiet. But he didn't. He left. He threw it to the wolves. He fed it to the wolves. So when she came home, when she got fed to the wolves, she was upset. And what did he expect that she was going to do? Obviously, in that anger, I think she let too much out. I think, her words, you coward, you two-faced, lazy scum, right? This is transgressing the bounds. Right? You've transgressed the bounds when you begin to talk to your spouse in this manner. And all of that sticks and stones may break my bones and words don't ever hurt. That's nonsense. Words hurt. Words cause pain, right? Words leave scars, right? SubhanAllah. And what you say can be something that can be devastating on another human being for years to come, inshallah ta'ala. That's why there's not only DV, domestic violence, right, in terms of you physically hurting your spouse or your significant other, but there's also an emotional component of, mental abuse, right, because of the way the words you use and the way you talk to a person, the way you make them feel, right, that you kind of remove that power from them. And in many instances, a woman can do this to a man. It is not always the case that it is the man doing it to the woman, right? And here we see that it was kind of the woman doing it to the man, subhanallah Rabbil Azim, and she was just pouncing down on him with no holds barred, right? And I think that that's something that you have to be very cognizant of. This is why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir, falyakul khayran aw liyasmut." Whoever believes in Allah and the last day, let him speak good or keep silent. And the scholars used to say, silence is golden, right? SubhanAllah. So you don't want to be that person who just speaks and uses your tongue as a destroying factor, right? I'm going to destroy this person, subhanAllah. And, emotionally, mentally, you break that person down and you kill their spirits, So subhanAllah, I think if you see yourself getting to that point, the best thing to do is close your mouth and leave. Step away. Go catch a breath of fresh air. Go for a walk. Find a way to, calm yourself down. Use the sunnah of going to make wudu, inshallah ta'ala. Use the sunnah of if you're standing, sit. If you're sitting, lay down, right? Use all of these things to try to calm you down. Go in the car and listen to Surah Al-Baqarah, right? Inshallah ta'ala. Listen to the Quran. Make dhikr, istighfar, and see, don't let shaitan push you to that edge that's not only an edge of destruction for yourself, but an edge of destruction for your significant other as well. Sister Tahira, mashallah, she says, no presence of Allah in the house. I'm thinking that she means, right, guidance or structure. It's having Allah in our lives and things are so challenging. SubhanAllah, but with Allah, we strive and have and find ways to cope and get through it, get through. It's sad that they never got help and just gave up. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, when you have Allah in your life, then, you know, it becomes a little bit different, inshallah ta'ala. And the reality is that, subhanAllah, in anger, everybody just removes Allah out of their life. You know, it's sad, but it's a reality. You know, you look at the hadith of the Prophet with that woman when she lost a child. She's like, you don't know what I'm going through. You know, she yelled at the Prophet, you know, because her anger overtook her in that moment, unfortunately, her rage, you know, based on what she's going through. And many times, you know, that's just the human being. Even when people say, you know, say astaghfirullah. Don't tell me say astaghfirullah. You astaghfirullah, right? I've seen it, right? SubhanAllah. You know, and it's just like, you know, the person is advising you, inshallah ta'ala, to fear Allah, to say astaghfirullah. You have the Egyptian method, right? Salli ala Rasulullah, send salams of peace and blessings upon the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to try to remind you. And people sometimes just don't want that advice. And it's just like, you know, it just further aggravates them and they further dig in and they further become even meaner. And it's unfortunate, you know, but if we have Allah in our lives and we put the Quran and Sunnah before us and we put that as the thing that is going to cause us to maneuver how I speak, how I act, how I behave, you know what I mean? And I'm checking myself by the Quran and Sunnah all the time, then that is the real characteristic of a believer. That is the real trait that you want to develop within yourself, inshallah ta'ala. And definitely, you know, they didn't seek any help at all. And when the house is on fire, when it's completely on fire, and you just keep throwing oil on the fire, right? It just keeps sparking and becoming worse. Unfortunately, they never began to put water on the house, and it just continued to bring down the house, unfortunately. Sister Sumaya, she says, empathy and the golden rule, which is an Islamic principle, is also very important. You know, so empathy, inshallah ta'ala, she says, using empathy for one another, inshallah ta'ala. We talked about the financial planning. We talked about that. You know, even with the whole issue of the, you know, the finances, you know, when he found out about the finances, they didn't talk about it. You know, he decided to just keep quiet about it. And, you know, unfortunately, they kept on going down the lizard's hole even further, you know, subhanAllah. The issue of having children, we talked about that before as well. The issue of having children, you know, the need to prep for that, inshallah ta'ala. Please, you know, prep for it, inshallah ta'ala. Just don't have children, because at the end, the ones who suffer are the children, subhanAllah, right? The ones who suffer are the children. Here Omar says, we often see the straw that broke the camel's back, but we forgot the million other straws underneath it, piled up high. Now, communication as a preventive measure is always a benefit, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah, for sure, for sure. There were many straws, right? As you're right, it was many straws before that straw broke, right? Subhana Rabbil Azim. And, you know, Allahu Akbar, Allah make us better communicators. I mean, iPhone said they definitely weren't ready to serve as parents. I think she was selfish and he wasn't a leader. The signs were evident early on that marriage, that it was going awry. The roles were indistinguishable. You know, one of the things in her defense, she had a postpartum depression. You know, she suffered through postpartum depression. You know, unfortunately, her mindset of something is wrong with my body and I have to prove to myself that I need to have this kid right now. And she left her job until, you know, she had a kid. It seems like she's one of those people that, you know, becomes fixated on certain things. And she became fixated on having the baby, not thinking about anything else. And then when she had the baby, unfortunately, a lot of women go through postpartum depression. It's a very real thing that men have to, you know, read about, know about, and be supportive of if your wife goes through it. You know, postpartum depression is so serious that even sometimes the women try to harm the baby. You know what I mean? It's just something goes wrong inside of their body and their system, and you know, subhanAllah, they go into the state of depression, and it needs attention. You know, it needs therapy, it needs counseling, and I think he wasn't able to see all of that. He just kept on kind of tossing it to the side that she's not handling her responsibilities as a mother, and she's just going out, hanging out with her friends. But probably the hanging out with her friends and the going shopping, all of that was part of the postpartum depression because she didn't want to come home to those crying kids. She didn't know what to do with that crying kid. She wasn't ready to be a mother, right? She mentioned it in the beginning, with the whole issue of the breastfeeding and the issue of the feeding and the diaper changing and the crying and everything else. It overwhelmed her so much, and it was something that she didn't expect, that she went into this depression. And that's part of those signs. Working all the time, being out of the home all the time. And rather than him saying, okay, something is wrong here, let's go get some help, because obviously my wife is avoiding our children. And, when you love your children, you don't avoid them, right? They may be difficult to deal with, unfortunately, and you just want to run out the house at times. But alhamdulillah, you're there, right? It's a fight, a battle that you have to continue doing, inshallah ta'ala. But the parent that just kind of avoids that, there's something going on, inshallah ta'ala. And if you see that depression and you see that stress, perhaps, there's something that needs to be discussed. And you may need to go, inshallah ta'ala, and get some help as well, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah, and definitely, we talked about that last week, that her purpose for having children definitely wasn't correct, as Sister Sumaya mentions. And definitely, it is identified as a psychiatric diagnosis. So postpartum depression is something that's real, inshallah ta'ala, and when you have kids, you just have to be aware of this, inshallah ta'ala. And definitely, it hit him like a ton of bricks, right? He didn't know. And, into his defense, he was probably ignorant of what postpartum depression was as well. He probably never heard of it before. Never, it was never mentioned. Nobody in his family probably went through it, right? So he was ignorant, and he was just seeing this as, standoffish rather than, what it really was, unfortunately, inshallah ta'ala. And again, because of ignorance on both sides, inshallah ta'ala. But definitely, the whole issue, again, of spending time outside of the home with friends, this is the easiest way to destroy your marriage. Like, if you're going to be hanging out, 4 or 5 times a week, 3, 4, 5 times a week at night with your friends, and coming home late, and, not being with your family, or the wife is doing that, this is going to destroy your family faster than you can light a match. I can tell you, because shaitan will be in the mix. Doubt is going to come in, and things are going to happen. People need to realize that when you become a family, your family comes first. Friends are no longer the important role here. Your husband, your wife, your children, that's what comes first, inshallah ta'ala. Every now and then, if you can get away and be with your friends and hang out, and you need some type of mashallah, of an activity, right? A getaway. That's fine, but to do that consistently, it becomes a problem in the home, inshallah ta'ala. Sister Nasur says, thank you for acknowledging these issues. I agree, and that we'll take the steps to heal and ask for guidance and forgiveness. Allah have mercy on us all. What else? Really quick, as we come into an end. Go ahead, somebody unmiked. Oh. Again, that final statement, subhanAllah, do you know it got bad when he said he went in the refrigerator and there was no milk, there were no chicken nuggets, right? Because that's what all they were eating, subhanAllah. There was no food. And he thought she did the shopping, and then she thought he did the shopping. That's when you know that things are really bad in the home. If you're not communicating to that level, that you just are expecting that someone else is going to do it, and then it never gets done, and your refrigerator is completely empty, and your kids don't have food to eat, subhanAllah, you've basically hit rock bottom in your marriage, right? SubhanAllah, communication has been thrown out the door altogether. And that was, that was sad actually to read and to hear. And then even her leaving, she walked out, and really, I find it to lack adulthood, she walked out. She took the kids and left when he went to go get food. You know what I mean? She let him leave, then to kind of pack everything up and leave. Again, to not deal with things as an adult, right? Not deal with things face to face and in person. That shouldn't be done. You should be able, as Allah says, you keep them in kindness. And we said this over and over again, or you release them in kindness. We should be able to communicate, inshallah, ta'ala and dialogue. If this is not going to work out, okay, fine. I'm okay with us, separating if we're not going to get help, but we still have to plan, right? Because what is going to happen with our kids? You know what I mean? Our kids are part of both of our lives, inshallah ta'ala, and we both have to be present in their lives, inshallah ta'ala. But what's going to happen with them, right? If you just walk out, and alhamdulillah, it seems like she walked out, but they still maintain a decent relationship for the kids. But there needs to be a conversation that takes place, inshallah ta'ala, as adults, and then you kind of move on, inshallah ta'ala, okay, it broke, khalas, it broke, khalas. We both knew that it broke, and you move on. But you kind of discuss what the steps are going to be from there, inshallah ta'ala, how the dissolution of everything is going to be, inshallah ta'ala. And even Islamically, the woman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that when the woman and the husband get divorced, during the iddah, the time period that the woman is required to stay with the husband until that time period is over, her 3 cycles, inshallah ta'ala. If he divorced her, 1 cycle if she's the one asking for the divorce, that, this is time for them to still be in the same home to discuss and talk and find out, is this really what we want to do? And if so, then, what's going to happen from here? And once the time period is done, are you going to leave? Am I going to leave? All of that has been figured out before that period, inshallah ta'ala. Or we want things to work out and we're going to stay together and we're going to go ahead and continue working at this and we're going to get help, right? Allah set these institutions in place for a reason, subhanAllah, and when we kind of just shove them to the side, we lose out the benefit of them. Sister Sumaya said lack of communication seems to be the most common thread for all of these failed and struggling marriages. Yeah, I agree. Lack of communication seems to be the top on the list of all the failures that have happened, right? That seems to be like number 1, that it starts there and then the trickle effects come down for everything else. Just to read what Sister Sumaya Bashir, she said regarding this, I'm just going to choose a few different sections. She said, with the increasing number of working wives, the lines have been blurred. And it is even more critical that couples clearly agree on their roles and responsibilities before marriage, right? And this is what we've been talking about, right? And when we have working wives, sometimes the lines are blurred. But if you discuss it, then you unblur those lines, inshallah ta'ala. She says, our main concern should be pleasing Allah, as Sister Tahira said, right? Not with one-upping Ali. I want to live better than the next woman. I want to have more than the next woman, right? Inshallah ta'ala, as was the case with her. The comparison game is exhausting because you remember she was saying, how are these women doing it? They got maids, they got this, they got that. Somehow they're, making it, right? So she says the comparison game becomes exhausting and pointless when you're comparing yourself to someone else. You and your friends are different, people with different life circumstances, right? We will only really ever find contentment and peace in our lives when we make our actions sincerely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and aim to please Him and Him alone. That should be how we measure our success. The other issue that is brought to light by the stress narrative is the horrendous habit of overspending, or more specifically, spending what we do not have. She goes on to say, we see that in this story when the newly married couple who both had well-paying jobs dig themselves into a deep pit of debt before they've even settled into their new apartment, right? They become, indebted to their credit cards and everything else, even before they move into their home. Many of the problems this couple faced could have been avoided had the parents discussed, taught, and trained them in areas such as dealing with finances, roles and responsibilities of the husband and wife, the realities of marriage, and how to run a household. Hollywood certainly won't take on the tasks of representing these things accurately. So it's up to parents and educators to burst the glorified love bubble, right? Burst the glorified love bubble that everybody tends to have and show our young Muslims that life is not a movie. Life is not a movie, okay? Or a television series, or a YouTube video, or a TikTok video, or an Instagram video, right? This is not life. Life is life with all of its challenges and trials. It requires a lot of hard work in a lot of different areas. Life is a test with the most brilliant reward for those who pass it. And if we can grasp this concept, then we can overcome virtually anything with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think that was a biggie. People kind of look at life, and unfortunately, we see the whole social media thing. Life becomes social media, and without it, we don't have a life, many of us, unfortunately. And that becomes sad. That becomes our lives. Pretty soon you're going to see people are not even going to go outside and interact anymore. It's just going to be this, right? SubhanAllah, may Allah prevent us and help us, inshallah, and protect us. The whole issue of the husbands and the wives mad at each other, and in the same home, and they text each other rather than talking to one another. Allah forgive us. Sister Francis says, thank you, brother, for your time. Thank you for joining us and being with us. Alhamdulillah. I have a specific example and question to follow. I would like to mention that I've heard some brothers feel that it is okay for them to always put their brothers first, go out as the wife did in the story 3 to 5 times a night, or just never come home. What is the best way for a sister to approach her husband about this situation when he may feel it's okay for the men to have this behavior? It is possible that these brothers may act in such ways because they're also not ready for marriage. They may be kids or still stuck in a young mindset. To clarify, Islamic brothers, not blood brothers. And, subhanAllah, unfortunately, this becomes the case sometimes. Unfortunately, it seems like these brothers may still be young-minded. They may still not be ready for the institution of marriage and what that entails, inshallah ta'ala. But, I think, and especially when you talk about not coming home, it's like, dude, what are you talking about? You're not coming home. That's the biggest causer of doubt ever in your wife, because, you're talking about you slept over your brother's house. Like, that's weird. You guys were out all night, to 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. Come on, man. Who does that, right? Muslims don't live that type of way. Muslims don't live that way outside of marriage. Muslims shouldn't be running in the streets, all night, because we're not people who are party goers. We're not clubbers. We're not, we're not going out and, living that nightlife like that, when we out chilling, and we don't do that type of stuff. That's not the life of the Muslim, So, to kind of do that while in the marriage can be destructive, inshallah ta'ala, for sure. I think, sister, I think sitting down with him and really asking him, can you give me proof from the Quran and Sunnah that men, should be doing this? That you should be out of your house with your brothers, that you shouldn't be here with your family, inshallah ta'ala, and the likes. Sometimes, and I'll tell you, sometimes, especially with new Muslims, right? Sometimes, especially with new Muslims or newer Muslims, sometimes those things become lifesavers, right? It is a life vest that the brother puts on, and it becomes the way by which he doesn't drown, right? And I tell you this because that was my case. When I first got married to my wife, unfortunately, my wife is here, and she can probably comment on it. I was never home. I was always in the masjid. Of course, people may say, well, that's a good thing. You were always in the masjid. But going to the masjid for salah is one thing, and staying in the masjid all day, it's another thing. I would come home from work, and I would stay in the masjid till Isha time, and sometimes a little bit after Isha, and then come home. And by the time you get home, it's late. It's time to go to sleep really, and, prepare for your night and get ready for work in the morning. And I did that for years. But for me, it was a lifesaver, right? I was in transition of changing my life. And at the masjid, it became a safe place for me. It was a place where I was able to be safe and not get in trouble any longer, where I was able to go and remove myself from the world that I was living in and try to escape the person that I was. And this was help for me. It was therapy. That was my therapy. It was my counseling sessions, right? Because, and literally it was like counseling sessions. I would sit in the masjid with the elders and we'd have conversations about everything under the sun, marriage, life, and I was a young buck. I was only 20, 21 years old, right? 20 years old, 21 years old. I'm around these 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old brothers. And for me, it became a lifesaver. I kind of had that life jacket on, and I was floating in the water, and I found, myself protected in that environment, but I didn't realize how that probably was impacting negatively my wife, who was home alone, right? And it wasn't until she told me years later, right, that, she felt alone those years, and she finally figured out why, because I was in the masjid all of the time. You know what I mean? SubhanAllah. And I don't remember us communicating about that, back then, why I'm not home or whatever have you, but sometimes this can be the case as well, SubhanAllah, that it can be a lifesaver for that brother. So really trying to, don't blow up, sister, don't do like the sister in the story and kind of just begin to yell and scold your husband, but sit down and have a very real conversation with him and, say, honey, I love you. You know what I mean? I want you to be home with us. Inshallah ta'ala, you're out all the time with your brothers. Me and the kids, we need you. Why is it that you're out all the time? We feel like maybe you don't want to be here. Maybe, I don't know, is it you don't love me no more? I don't know. What's going on? What's going through your mind that keeps you from being home? Because honestly, there's nothing in the Quran and Sunnah that I can find that legitimizes, being outside the house that way. There's no hadith that the Prophet would be out of his home that way. The Prophet used to be home with his wives. The Prophet at night, we knew he was home. Why? Because he was at night making qiyamul layl, right? He was at night praying to his Lord, inshallah ta'ala. And Aisha radiallahu anha, she said she would move over. She wouldn't feel the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when she would touch his feet, she knew that he was praying. Imagine, and even with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? SubhanAllah, he gets up one night and he leaves the house, SubhanAllah. And it's the middle of the night. And Aisha's like, yo, he's going to see another wife. I know it. She puts her stuff on and she rushes out the house. SubhanAllah. And she follows the Prophet ﷺ to the graveyard. And the Prophet ﷺ, he went to go make dua for the people in the graveyard. And then when the Prophet ﷺ started coming back, he sees like a little black thing in the shadows. And he starts walking faster. She starts walking faster. He starts jogging. She starts jogging. And they get home and she's laying in bed and yeah, and, he's like, yeah, Aisha, are you okay? Why are you panting that way, right? And she had to confess, Allahu Akbar. She had to confess, Ya Rasulullah, I got jealous, right? To show that the Prophet was at home at night. You know what I mean? He wasn't running around with Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and chilling in Medina, out there. They went home. Right? This is where the man should be at night. This is where the wife should be at night, inshallah ta'ala. So really try to just dialogue and talk with him, from a point of sincerity, from a point of love, from your heart. And hopefully he'll open up to you. And hopefully, you'll get some answers. Because, really it's hard to say what can be what. We're both going to assume. We're both going to guess. And really, it's not appropriate. What's appropriate is confront the brother, communicate with him, talk about it. Right? We talk about communication being the first. Talk about it, and just express how you feel and say, really, I need you to be here more, inshallah ta'ala. Can you do that, inshallah ta'ala? Your family should be first, inshallah ta'ala. And then hopefully, he'll respond back positively. If he responds back negatively, and then inshallah ta'ala, you have two options. Okay, well, if you think it's okay for the brother to be out the house like that, then do you think that, we can go sit down with the imam? And maybe the imam can, correct me. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But maybe the imam can correct me. Don't blame him. I'd say take it on yourself. Use wisdom. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the imam can correct me, inshallah ta'ala, and give me some advice while we're both there, inshallah ta'ala, right? Just to get him to sit down with the imam. And then if it's other than that, then, maybe getting counseling and therapy and help that way, inshallah ta'ala, may be another objective counseling, inshallah ta'ala. Allah knows best. May Allah make it easy for you, sister, inshallah ta'ala, and give you the hikmah, the wisdom, the words, inshallah ta'ala, to say what to say. Lastly, I'll say, women mature much more faster than men. I don't know how old you are, inshallah ta'ala, but, especially our young men these days, a sister probably by the age of 19, 20, she's mature, she's ready. Sometimes our brothers are 25, 26, and they're not ready. They're childish as it could be. I look at our young men, nowadays, and and I just shake my head, because by 16, 17, I was working. I was taking care of myself. At one point, I had my own apartment by the time I was 18, taking care of my own bills. My parents taught me to do that. It was something that I got brought up in my household. Once I started working, I left school. You take care of yourself now. You buy your own goods. You buy your own things. You are now, mashallah, the owner of yourself, right? We're not going to give you any more and take care of you anymore. But sometimes that's not the case with other people. Sometimes they're babied until their 30s. And, unfortunately, they kind of bring that into relationships with them, inshallah. And then Sister Sumaya, she says, masjid with brothers is different from hanging out elsewhere. Inshallah, Allah reward your wife for her patience. Ameen, ameen. That's my wife, by the way. So ameen, Allah reward her for her patience. And, mashallah, that time that I spent away from the house, those years, inshallah ta'ala. And now we seek permission to go out the house, inshallah ta'ala, right? Is it okay? This day we kind of talk about it. This day I'm going to go do X, Y, Z. We put it on the calendar so we know what's happening, inshallah ta'ala. This is some of the stuff that gets done anyway. Sometimes I'm guilty and I don't do it. So then she holds me accountable and communicate about it, right? Brother Omar, may Allah preserve your marriage and progeny, and for all the Muslims, and make it a proof for us and not against, and a benefit on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Ameen. Ameen. Jazakallah khair, Brother Omar. Ameen. Jami'an. For all of us. Khair. So with that, brothers and sisters, any last comments, any last reflection, anything? Don't forget, inshallah ta'ala, next week we have Sister Susie Ismail again. She's the author of the book, When Muslims Fail. She's going to come and be our guest speaker, inshallah ta'ala, for the last session in this class. Don't miss it. Actually share it with others, invite others. Alhamdulillah, she is a gem. Sister Susie is a gem, alhamdulillah. I've been on many panels with her. Alhamdulillah, I've emceed panels that she's on. Alhamdulillah, I've listened to her speak. And alhamdulillah, she's extremely, mashallah, she has a lot of benefit with her, alhamdulillah. So, come out and benefit from her, inshallah ta'ala. Sister Sumaya says it is important for us to constantly make dua for our spouses. Yeah, it's important for us to constantly make dua for our spouses and to constantly make dua for our children, okay? And your children to constantly make dua for your parents, right? So around about 360 degrees. Sister Francis says, thank you so much. I appreciate the examples and the stories you have shared. I will share this with my sisters and keep it for myself when it is my time. I can relate with the masjid being a safe place. I spend a lot of time there, mashallah. May Allah keep your marriage healthy and strong. Ameen. And yours as well, sister. Ameen, ameen, ameen. Okay, so with that, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to be leaving off for tonight. Alhamdulillah. Don't forget, tomorrow is our book club, Women Around the Messenger. We basically have 2 weeks left. Next week would be the ending of all of our courses. And then we'll be taking a week break. And then inshallah ta'ala, the week after that, we'll be coming back with new courses. So probably by next week, inshallah ta'ala, we'll be publicizing what are going to be the next courses that we're going to be covering and going over. Alhamdulillah, there's a lot going on the Mass New York Retreat Connect. Mondays we were going through Riyadh al-Salihin. Tuesdays we have new Muslim classes by Sister Alejandra for sisters, by Brother Omar for brothers. Wednesday we have this marriage class. Thursdays we have our book club starting up in the next new semester. Saturdays we'll be having Nuraniya, learning how to read the Quran, inshallah ta'ala. Unfortunately, those spots are already closed off, right? But if someone wanted to sign up for that class that hasn't signed up for that class, email us at massnewyork.org and we can put you on a waiting list just in case someone else drops. If someone else drops, then we can slide you into that spot. If not, that class will be 16 weeks long. After those 16 weeks are done, then we will commence a new class, inshallah ta'ala. Or if we get another 12 or 14 people, inshallah ta'ala, and I can find a third instructor, then alhamdulillah, and we have that many people who will go ahead and try to see a third instructor to have a third class, inshallah ta'ala. This weekend, we do have our marriage, how to navigate and how to identify negative things in our marriage. It's going to be on site in the Mass Youth Center on 1933 Bath Ave in Brooklyn from 6 to 8. We have two, mashallah, certified therapists who are going to be delivering the lecture for us. Two sisters, very experienced in this aspect. So, if you can make it on site, please make it on site. Again, if you can make it, email us, inshallah ta'ala. We have a form. Or you can go on Facebook as well, Mass New York Rewrites Reconnect Facebook, and kind of go to the events page and sign yourself up for that. And we're trying to make sure we have enough food for everybody. And if you can't, then we're also going to be streaming it live on Zoom through this link, inshallah ta'ala. Imam, do you have the pages to cover for tomorrow's book club? I don't have the pages with me right now. Actually, hold on. Give me 1 minute. I can pull that up for you, inshallah. So for tomorrow's class, we're going to be going through more than likely pages 269 to possibly 300. So it's going to be talking about the Prophet as a father, and we're going to be looking at Zainab, inshallah ta'ala, and then probably Ruqayya, the daughter. So we're going to be looking now at the daughters of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So 269 to about page maybe 300, 310 or so. I'm going to probably summarize a little bit more tomorrow, just so that we can go ahead and within the next 2 weeks, inshallah ta'ala. How can we confirm if we signed up already for the Quran class? So Sister Munira, inshallah ta'ala, Sister Alejandra is going to be reaching out to everybody. That we already have 24 people who have sent us messages. I don't think we have more than 24, and Allah knows best. But those 24 who did send us, they're locked in. So you may be part of that 24, inshallah ta'ala, already, because I don't think more people came in. So we already have 2 instructors, but she's going to be sending out something within the next day or so, just to let people know, inshallah ta'ala, that, a poll. We want to do a little poll. The class is going to be on Saturday mornings, inshallah ta'ala. We're just going to be choosing maybe like 9 or 10 o'clock and seeing what's best for everybody, inshallah ta'ala, and then choose that time and then begin, and then let you know when the class is going to begin and who the instructor is going to be. We have a sister and we have a brother, so there may be a possibility, maybe with the sister, there's maybe a possibility that you may be with the brother, inshallah ta'ala. Khayr, wa iyyak, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. And for the sisters, there's no concern, just to address this out front, when the sisters are learning the Quran, there's no concern with your voice being out, inshallah ta'ala. This is for the purpose of knowledge, the purpose of learning. So it is okay for you to have a male instructor, inshallah ta'ala, who's going to teach you to recite the Quran properly. And there's no issues with that. So you don't have to worry about that, inshallah ta'ala. I'm pretty sure the brother, if you don't want to turn your camera on, I'm pretty sure he'll be more than fine with that. Really, all he needs to do is listen to your voice, inshallah ta'ala, not the way you're pronouncing things. So, don't be discouraged if it's a brother teaching you, just like we're in class now. And if you were to use the mic here, inshallah ta'ala, there's no issues with you using the mic and using your voice, inshallah ta'ala, in this classroom setting. And we know that Aisha radiallahu anha, she would also teach the men from behind a veil, right? So the voice was there. So even now with the Zoom, you have your camera off. That's like being behind the veil because you can't be seen, but all you are doing is being heard, inshallah ta'ala. So just wanted to toss that out there for anyone who may have concerns in terms of that. So with that, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah bless you all and your families. May Allah make you all from those whom He loves and is pleased with. And may He grant all of you Jannat al-Firdaus al-A'la, and may He build for you next to Him a home in the paradise. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.